Hello and welcome to this lesson where we start to have a look at creating function procedures. So throughout this course we've been covering sub-procedures or a subroutine, otherwise known as a macro. This last bit now we're going to look at a function procedure, which is a procedure that returns a value. It gives us the ability of creating our own function either for use on a spreadsheet, just like Excel provide the 450 plus functions like VLOOKUP, match, sum, if, and so on. Or also we can call them within our current sub-procedures as well to make our code easier to read and to break it down into smaller chunks. So, in this example, I have this slightly awkward if function put into column C here to calculate commission, which should probably be formatted as a currency. But let's not worry about that too much right now. It's saying, if the sales figure was over 7,000 or equal to 7,000, then they get 15% of that amount as commission. If it was between 5,500 and 7,000, sorry, less than 7,000, they get 10%. Or if it's between 4 and 5.5, they get 7%. Or it's between 2.5 and 4, they get 5%. Otherwise, they get nothing if it was less than 2.5. So, achievable here, but working the idea that that is not the easiest thing to read, and you may have colleagues that are going to struggle with that kind of stuff, and it may even scare them. It's a bit of an intense formulae, not the easiest thing to write, and a bit horrible to read. But also, working the idea that there is not a function for everything. And time again, it's not unusual that you want to achieve something that there's just not a function for. So you may have to create it yourself. You have this ability, that's what we're going to look at now. So I'm going to dive into our VBA code. We'll ignore this subroutine that is there at the moment for now. I'm going to come back to that. And at the bottom, not it really matters where it goes. Actually, let's put it at the top so it's easier to see. Above that, I'm going to write function. So a function procedure begins with the word function as opposed to the word sub. There's your main difference there. And then we'll follow it with its name. And I'm going to call it commission. And the only reason I'm writing that in capitals is because the functions Excel provide is in capitals. And I'm trying to keep it uniform. There's absolutely no reason apart from that for why you would do that. Okay, and I'm going to put an opening bracket. Now we haven't really put anything in these parentheses throughout this course. Now what we need to do is provide an argument or a kind of parameter for the user. So this is going to calculate commission. That is based on the sales figure, which was the cell to the left. It was cell B2 to begin with on our sheet, if I remind myself. It was this figure here. We need the user to provide that figure for this commission to work. So we're going to ask for that, and I'm going to call it sales. So we can call it whatever we want. Your chance to give it a meaningful name now. I don't know what you thought when you were learning the functions of Excel. VLOOKUP notoriously has some rather poorly worded arguments that people struggle to understand what it's trying to ask them. Now you can call this whatever you want, nice and meaningful, easy to read and use. In our case on our worksheet, that is cell B2, but refer to it as sales. Just like the sum function asks for number 1. Okay, moving this down, notice they write end function for us, just like it does end sub, and they section it off because I'm putting another macro here. And now what we're going to do is calculate the commission similar to what I'd already written in that spreadsheet. But rather than use an if then else statement, well, there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm going to go for select case. Been a while since we saw select case in this course. Another conditional construct that is arguably better when handling multiple conditions. And I've kind of got 4/5 lines here. There were 4 if functions on that spreadsheet. So it's kind of 5 possible actions, if that makes sense. So select case, the case is sales. The user will provide a figure by something called sales. I'm going to test that. End select. Okay, line 1. case is greater than or equals, trying to remember what I did, 7,000 I believe, colon. What do you want to do if the case is greater than or equals 7,000? I'm going to say commission equals, so return into commission, just like we assign to variables and assign to cells. I'm assigning it to this function, so the function take the value with it. Sales, aka B2, multiplied by 0.15. Said 15%, if I remember. Right, let's take a copy of that. I'm going to need 4 more lines, so I'm going to power them in. Boom, 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 and boom. Let's close that white space up. Right, next up, case, I'm going to say greater than or equals, it was 5,500 to trying to remember what I did, less than 7,000. Sounds good to me. Commission equals 10%. Should have written this stuff down. What have I done? Oops, I don't need these greater than or equals. Getting myself in a muddle there. Too busy trying to remember. Let's change that to 6,999 now, as I'm opting for that. So sorry, case 5,500 to 6,999. Case, right, we've now got 4,000 to 5,499. How's my maths? And I think I did 7% for that one. It doesn't really matter if I get it wrong with what the calculation was. We get the idea. Right, this one was 2,500 though to 3,999. This was going to be 5%, and in the fact that the case is less than 2,500, or not that number, is going to be that commission equals 0. They get nothing. So, hopefully you'd agree, easier to read. That's what the select case statement does, so that is easier to read than a big nested if. But that is exactly the same as we have on that spreadsheet. Now what I've done is create this function procedure though. So, if I was to close down this editor and come back to the code, and if I was to, actually let's put it side by side so I can see it. Commission 2. In this example, I'm going to say equals and start writing commission. Notice commission comes up as a function within that library. How awesome is that? Now you notice that the only thing that kind of lets this down, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a later video, is that I do not get the description like they get. Now we're going to look at how we can add descriptions and stuff to a function. Unfortunately though, you're not going to get it in this environment. I'll say a bit more on that later, but that can't be done, I'm afraid. But I do see commission here, and when I complete it, I can provide the sales figure, cell B2, closing bracket, and I've got the same figure. And if I copy that down, it achieves the same job. So I've written our own function that hopefully we can agree is far easier to read. Equals commission B2. It will calculate the commission as opposed to that rubbish. The same job, but we've done all the hard work behind the scenes in our editor and provided for our users a nice simple to use function. That is the idea. Okay, let me just get rid of some of this stuff because that is going to cause an issue in my example here. Let's clear that. Just before I do another example, I want to show going into the function library. So I'm going to click this FX button, and I'm going to go into the list of these kind of categories of functions. And one of the categories in there is user defined. So I'll mention that these function procedures, these custom functions, they can also be known as user defined functions, or UDFs. And here they are, and I can see commission in here. Commission sales. So a bit more descriptive than what we had in our worksheet. In the later video, this is where I'm going to demonstrate to you how we can get our descriptions in here, and it needs to look like a proper function. You know, descriptions and all the kind of arguments and that, which at the moment you're not getting, you know, as much. Cell contains a sales value. You're not going to get as much there. So I'm going to show you how we can provide this kind of stuff for it. But at the moment there is not that information. Okay, shooting back to our editor. So that is using the function within the worksheet. What this other sub-procedure here is for is to show that we can provide that function now to other sub-procedures as well. So what I've done is I've written out a loop that's going to loop through every salesperson within that list, and I want to calculate their commission as part of this. So this could be, let's imagine this is a massive procedure, and rather than having this chunk in the procedure where you've got this loop going on, or you've got this quite intense conditional construct, we can write this as a function procedure in a, like a separate little procedure, and then just call it from the other major procedure, therefore making the code easier to read. That is the plan. So in this example, hopefully I can put cells row num, which is storing the row number I'm currently in, comma, and then I'm going to put 3 because I'm in column C in this example, closing bracket dot value equals commission. So I'm calling the function I've created, opening bracket. Notice how it pops up and asks for sales. So here I'm calling the function procedure that I've created. So throughout this course we've used things like is numeric, I think we used write, we've used message box, you know, input box, all these inbuilt functions. Here we've created our own ones to do a certain job. That's prompted me for information. Give me the sales figure. Okay, the sales figure is cells row num, comma 2. It's in column B dot value. Have I written that rightly? I have. I need one more closing bracket there, I think. No, I don't. I'm going crazy. And I better put in that row num equals row num plus 1. I literally just realised that I'd missed that out. So if I return back to my sub procedure, hang on, don't need to be in a particular cell, no. Yep, just going to test that's okay. Let's go and run our macros this way. So there's my sub procedure as a macro. Notice the function procedure does not appear in this list because it's not a macro. It's not a sub procedure, it's a function procedure. And I'm going to run calculate commissions. I've gone one too small there by the looks of it. I'm not sure what I've done there. I'll have to investigate that. Never mind. Let's have a quick look at that before I end. But the job is done. I've provided that function procedure as part of this inbuilt sub procedure. Let's quickly return back to our code. What have I done? Counting column A, two, do until it equals. Oh, sorry. My loop is wrong. Do while row num is less than or equal. That would do the job. Let's just give that one more try. I don't like this unfinished business. But maybe I should have left that as a job for you guys to do. There's a problem. Find out what's wrong with it. And now we're up and running. Okay, happy with that now. So that is our function procedure. Run as part of a normal function within a worksheet, or also calling it from a sub-procedure. Really useful tool for providing extra functionality for users, but also to tidy up existing procedures. Hello and welcome to this lesson where we are going to take our function procedure a step further by adding a second argument to it. We're going to look at adding an optional argument to our existing commission function procedure. And we're also going to look at specifying data types within it as well, which we haven't done in our custom function as yet. So looking at our function up above, let's add to the existing argument at the moment. Right at the moment we mentioned sales, and it works a dream. We demonstrated that in the previous lesson. What I'm going to put is sales as double. So I'm going to take it a step further by specifying a data type. So just like we have done with variables and that in previous kind of lessons and projects, we should really specify a data type for our parameters or our arguments as well. And I'm going to put that as a double for the type of data it can handle. But I'm going to put a comma after that argument, and we're going to look at adding a second one. Now the example here, the kind of pretend idea, was that we have two different kind of sales figures that a salesperson can have, online and offline. And if the sales online, we're trying to imagine that maybe this lead is kind of a lot of stuff's done for them, so the sale is typically a bit easier to make. So we're going to say that if this is the online value, then the commission will be slightly less than it is offline. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to write optional, because I'm going to mention this is an optional argument. I'm going to call it online. I'm going to put the data type as Boolean. So remember, Boolean data types only handle either true or false, 1 or 0. So I'm going to say this is an optional argument. It's called online and it's Boolean. So if it says true, then it was an online sale and the commission should be slightly less than it is at the moment. If not, then it's kind of false. But it is optional. If somebody doesn't specify it, then it's going to have to take a certain action as well. Okay, so within our function, and now I've got this information. Well, actually, one last thing I could do. At the end of the function procedure, remember function procedures, their job is to return a value. I should specify the data type of that value as well, so I can put as double at the end of my function procedure as well. So these two data types for each argument, but then the function procedure itself will return double. Okay, so a bit on data types there. Right, we're going to say if online then. So online is a Boolean value. So it's either true or false. Now there's nothing stopping me saying like if online equals false and stuff like that. Because I'm testing if it's true, I can just use the word online. I don't have to put online equals true. That's not wrong, it's just not necessary. So I'm going to put if online, then, and I'm going to copy this select case statement to save myself some hassle, but I'm going to make these percentages slightly less. So maybe it's 10% there, and then this would be 7%, 0.7, and that would be 5%. Instead of 5, it will be 3, and then 0. And I'm going to put my else, and at the end of this I'm going to put end if. So we've added some data types to our existing arguments. I have this second argument which also happens to be optional, and then we test it. If they said it's online, do this stuff. If it's not online, then do this stuff. Let's have a look at it in action. Let's close down my editor and let's start writing commission inside here. Or I'll tell you what, sorry, not inside there. For a bit more, let's go through our function library. And here we go. I can see now at the bottom it says sales and online. If I click OK, it wants these two bits of information. So if I provide a sales figure for it, immediately it's giving me information. It's saying that the answer is 350. Now I'm trying to remember what values we set. Let's see what we put for online. If I type true, then it's 250. And if I type false, then it's 350. So by default, if somebody leaves the optional argument empty, if they leave it alone, it's choosing the offline option. So it must be set to false by default, because it's a slightly higher figure. But if they type true, then they're getting the online figure. Yes, it was online, I can see it dropped to 250. So 5,000, yeah, I can't remember what that was. And I'm going to try, but we could have a look. But we can see that it is optional, it's running without it, and the difference it makes, and it is a Boolean variable as well. So I can click OK to that, I could copy it down, and these are online sales figures now. Okay, so from what we just looked at there, our next video, the plan is to have a look at how we can add more documentation to this. Because what we just saw there with the default being false, we need to provide that information to a user now so they don't have to work it out like we just did and they know what's going on. Hello and welcome to this lesson where we start to look at documenting our function procedures. So as mentioned in an earlier lesson, unfortunately we're not going to be able to provide documentation for when users approach the function in this way and they're writing it on the worksheet. To the best of my knowledge, that is not possible in this current stage of Excel. Hopefully for the future, but it's not something we're going to be able to do. However, we can provide the documentation for when users approach via this way. And they go through the function library, use defined, and at the moment there's no help available on this function. And when they click OK, there's no information about the arguments as to what they do. We can document it in that way. And that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to pop to the VBA environment. And here's our function procedure that we've been using so far. And also down below our little loop. And I should mention that we also get this documentation when we go for the VBA environment. So if I was to rewrite that commission, for example, and put an opening bracket, there is some of the information from our previous lesson. That we've got the data types available now for when somebody's calling that function procedure. And also you can see the square brackets around online as Boolean to indicate that is an optional argument. Okay, I'm going to pull out of that because I don't really want to do that, but look for a demonstration of that. And we're going for the this workbook object on the left hand side. We're going to open up this workbook and I'm going to pop open the workbook open event procedure. So if you haven't seen the section in this course on using the event procedures, this might be a good opportunity for you to pop and have a look at that first. However, don't worry, it's not necessary. We have kind of just triggered that for now. So whenever somebody opens this workbook, it's going to run this documentation code. So we're sure that it's there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use application.macrooptions. If I spell application correctly, that would have popped up. Let's give that another go. Here we go, macro options. So we can see it's a method of the application object, and it asks us for lots of information. So what I want to do is provide a description for both the function and the arguments for it by doing this. And the first question is what macro? Because I may have multiple macros. In this case it's just the one in here, this function procedure. But I'm going to have to answer that. Macro, and the name of the macro is commission. So with the commission macro, and I'm going to put a space underscore here to continue in a new line, because I fear I'm going to run out of room there. Let's try and align these a little bit better. And I'm going to have description. And now for a description, let's write some waffle about what this function does. I'm going to say that it calculates salesperson commission dependent upon sales total and whether sales are online or offline. So a bit of a mouthful there. Let me scroll back to the left a bit. Can I squeeze that in if I move it a little bit further along? That's a bit much, isn't it? I might have to line continuation in the middle there as well. Can I do that? Yeah, it's quite happy with that. No, it's not quite happy with it. Might have to concatenate the two bits of text if I want it on one line. Okay, let's not worry. I can put it all on one long line. It's just a shame I can't see it all. No biggie. Let me just check. I do have my empty. Here's my closing string bracket. Right, so the next up, if I just actually put a line continuation on the end of that. Here we go. So a new line. I'm going to ignore these others. The next one I want is argument descriptions. Actually, before we do argument descriptions, although I'm not going to do it, let's give a short little shout out to category here, because that's normally quite a common reason for people to come here, that they want to assign their function to one of the existing categories within Excel, or to create their own category for it. So make sure we're happy. By category, I mean the categories already existing for these functions, like logical, lookup and reference, text, maths and trigonometry. These different categories that you find these functions in, like VLOOKUP and if. So I'm not going to worry about that for now. I'm going to leave it within the user-defined category, but it's quite a common reason for people to come here. And I'm going to use the argument descriptions. Now, before I do this, I have two arguments on this function. One called sales, one called online. So because I've got more than one information to display, I'm going to take this opportunity to declare a variable. And I'm going to create an array variable, which I'm going to call arg descriptions. And I'm going to put one in closing brackets. Remember, array variables are 0 based. So by putting 1, I'm actually saying there's 2 items in this array, 0 and 1. And I'm going to mention that that is as string. They're both data types of string. And then I'm going to assign the descriptions for the arguments to them. So arg descriptions 0 equals, so this is for the sales argument, the first one, the cell containing the sales total, and I'm going to copy that to save myself just a very small bit of time. Arg descriptions 1, so the second argument, which is the one about online. I'm going to say whether the sales total is for online or offline sales. Enter, what was it by default? I'm trying to remember now. I think it was false by default, wasn't it? Enter false or leave omitted for offline sales. Enter true for online. So that will do as a description. You get the idea, especially as this is a optional argument. I need to mention what would happen if they did omit it. And hopefully I've remembered correctly from the previous lesson. Did I put my closing speech marks at the end? I did. Okay, now back to our application.macro options. And I need to put in a comma and say that argument descriptions is equal to arg descriptions. So referencing my array variable there. Wonderful. Here we go. So that should do the job. Happy with that, I think. So the step is to check out that this works. So let's close down this VBA environment. The workbook needs to be open for this documentation to be triggered. So I'm going to have to save this and close it all down. Let's close down documenting function procedures. And I'm going to reopen documenting function procedures to initialize that workbook open event. So that now if I have a look at my user-defined function, I get the description at the bottom. So now I've got the commission function, sales online, calculates the salesperson commission dependent upon sales total and whether sales are online or offline. And if I click OK, I've got a description for the sales one there. Cell contain the sales total, and for online, what that means and what I need to do in each case. So a very useful skill to provide documentation for your procedures so that people understand what they are using from within this worksheet or VBA interface. Hello and welcome to this lesson where we look at creating an add-in in Excel VBA. So we've seen a few different ways that we could distribute our sub-procedures and our function procedures during this course. We've looked at how we can save them mainly to a specific file or workbook. So that workbook can be distributed in any means, via email or via a shared drive. As long as that file is open, a procedure would be available to its user, whether that's us or somebody else. We've seen the personal macro workbook, which would only make it available to us, but it would be available in any file that we use, a hidden workbook called the personal macro workbook. And now we're going to look at an add-in, which is possibly the best way of distributing procedures for others. We can save this thing called an add-in that can be distributed in some means, and then it can be enabled in other people's Excel, making all the procedures available to them, from whether it's accessing it through the VBA interface or through Excel normally. Then macros and then functions are available. Now at the moment I've got a file called Book2 open, so it's just an Excel file. It's got absolutely nothing inside it because I'm not interested in importing anything there. But in the VBA environment we do have some stuff. We have the function procedure from the previous lessons. So the exact same function procedure from previous is in here, in a module 1. And I've also got the documentation in here as well for it. Both within a module, and this documentation is actually stored within a sub-procedure called function documentation. So I've put it in a sub-procedure this time, as opposed to the workbook open event which it was in the previous lesson. Because this time I don't want it to open with this workbook. Well, I will do when it's an add-in, but I'm going to take a different follow a different process for it. What I'm going to do, so it's called function documentation, this procedure. I'm going to double click on this workbook object as before, and kick up the workbook open event procedure, and I'm going to call that macro. So I'm going to call documentation. I remember what it's called. Call function documentation. And one of the reasons I'm going this way is because when we use an add-in, when that's enabled on somebody's machine, when they open Excel, not a specific file, when they open Excel, it tries to deal with the add-in slightly before it's opened any files, in the kind of order they're doing a job. So you will typically get an error message saying that it cannot edit a workbook whilst there are no workbooks open. Because when you're going to change the documentation of a macro or a procedure, you need that workbook open. So you can't do it before it's open. It's just a bit of a nuance about the order that it runs. It's one of them things that you just kind of find and you think, oh, gee, I didn't know that, how could I? And maybe you're speaking to people, you're Googling, and you find this issue. Someone will bring it to light and you can deal with it. What we're going to do is put workbooks.add a statement before that. So we're going to force the fact that a workbook is open before it tries to run that procedure and documents it. So we're going to ensure that we don't get that error because we're going to make sure one is open first. So that's the way we're going about it. So now I'm going to close down this editor, and the next logical step would be to create that add-in. So I'm going through the normal save as process, but instead of saving it as an Excel workbook, we're going to save it as an Excel add-in. So this should take you to the add-ins folder. It takes you straight to that path. Now yours might differ from me depending on the version of Excel or the version of Windows, or even if, whatever device you may be using, it may differ a little bit. I'm not too sure how much this has changed over the years, but it's bound to have changed a little bit. But it should take you there straight away anyhow. Otherwise, if yours isn't for some reason, maybe something to look up and you'll have to go there manually. Okay, I'm going to give it the name Awesome Functions. We'll give this file a name, just like you would in any other file. And I'm going to call it Awesome Functions, working with the idea that even though we've only really got one in here called commission, it will list loads of different sub-procedures and function procedures, making them available to everybody in the company or whatever your style, or whatever your scenario is. I'll click Save to save it, and that add-in is saved. Okay, now with that done, next step will be to go to the Developer tab, which should be visible at the top, and to the Add-ins button. When I go into Add-ins, I can see the Awesome Functions add-in available, but at the moment it's not enabled. So I'm going to tick the box to enable that add-in and click OK, so Awesome Functions is now available within this file. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to close down Excel. So I'm going to close Excel down completely, and then I'm going to reopen Excel. And as I'm reopening it, have a look at the startup window. It's going to be very fast, but you should notice it enable the add-in as it does it. So if I close this down, no, I don't want to save that. And if I kick open Excel, so here we go. I don't know if you saw that or not, but it would have gone through the process of enabling the add-in as it went. So now, I'm just going to check that out. If I go to Developer and Add-ins, there it is, all enabled. Bit of a pointless for me showing that, but I just wanted to show you that it's still ticked and stuff. But what's better to show is if I go to my FX button, and if I go to the User Defined, that it is available and the documentation is there. So I'm now in a completely different file, and I don't have like that file open or anything. It's like this hidden file, this add-in that's got enabled at startup of Excel, and it's making this function available to me within any file, and I can distribute this to others and they can enable it and have it available in any file that they need. So that is the kind of add-in for distribution, and also a little bit of another way of looking at how we can set up the documentation of function procedures specifically, and the little kind of nuance that we get there.